Yesterday was a really special day for me because it was my Muslim birthday, and it's like my half-life Muslim birthday. So now I converted when I was 27, and now I've been Muslim 27 years. So I can like say it's been half my life, which is really cool. So we had a nice movie night here, and it was very special, especially because we were used to, pre-COVID, going to the movies like literally every weekend, multiple times a weekend, and we haven't gone anywhere since everything shut down. So it was just really lovely. Thank you to everybody for setting that up. And so, of course, you know, like these kinds of occasions make me think back to my early convert days and just a lot of like warm memories of awkwardness and, you know, things that now are just look so different, of course, you know, 27 years later. But I thought I would just share some of these gems. I've been trying to focus some of my stories around the convert experience because I really want to encourage people not to be afraid to be converts or to be nice to converts, or to talk to converts. Because if you're a convert or you know converts, you know what ends up happening is after the 2 seconds of glory when you meet Muslims, after that you actually don't, it's like no one talks to you again. So you're sort of left on your own to your own devices. But alhamdulillah, because then you have more time to talk to God, and that's what's really important. But I remember just like sort of random stories. I was just sort of praying, I'm like, God, please help me think of the right stories to share, because there's so many, and so I'll share more as we go. But I remember the first time I went back, I went to high school with someone that many of you may know, Professor Asifa Qureshi. She's a professor in Wisconsin. And we went to high school together, and it was funny because I knew her from middle school, and she used to wear hijab. And at that time, you know, as a teenager, right, you look at things that are weird, and you just assume that people are weird. And so I remember, like, when seeing her wear a scarf, and remember during PE, we used to do those, like, tests where you would have to run a mile, and they would, like, you know, evaluate how good your physical state was. And she couldn't do them, I remember, because there was one time where she was fasting, and it was during Ramadan, and I thought, oh God, what a weird person, and who would wear a scarf, and all of that. And this went on through high school. So, you know, to my chagrin, of course, then 10 years later, you know, when I actually converted to Islam, I thought to myself, oh my God, this woman had the secret that I had been searching for my entire life. And how could I, you know, like, I was so excited to meet her again and apologize. And, you know, we met at our high school 10-year reunion, and actually we connected because I met her friend, another famous person named Moja Kaf, who is a poet that many people may know. She was someone that I met in my early days as a convert. And so Moja and Asifa were very close friends, and they kind of talked. And so I was very excited in my mind to meet up with Asifa again at our reunion, which was held at a bar in downtown Palo Alto. So I show up at the bar, and, you know, I don't wear hijab. I look pretty much the same as I did in high school. So I think everyone just assumed that I was the same, which to me, of course, you know, anyone who thinks back on their high school days is just mortified with like who they were as a high school student, and that I'm no exception to that rule. So I was looking for Asifa, and found her on the second floor of the bar, and, you know, everyone was there, and she looked at me and she said, oh my God, you are the last person I ever thought would have converted to Islam. And I was sort of shocked, and I didn't quite know how to process that, so I sort of set it aside, and then I was just very happy to talk to her, and I just assumed that she would be my best friend, and, you know, because now we had, you know, something in common. And so she basically gave me her business card and said, nice to see you again. And I didn't see her the rest of the night. Not any shame on Asifa, of course, she probably assumed I was still the same, you know, weird person in high school. But it was just funny because it's like, you know, when you enter a situation and you feel like you literally look the same on the outside, right? So everyone assumes there's nothing different about you, but you know that everything inside of you has changed. It's an interesting thing, and especially you just don't identify, you don't look Muslim in any way, you don't act Muslim in any way, and of course you're in a bar, so, you know, you're like already doing something that's kind of questionable, and as a convert you don't really know, like, okay, what do I do, what does that mean? So that was one sort of funny memory. Another funny memory, of course, is I converted during the month of Ramadan, and so I think I've shared my story before about how that happened, and maybe I'll share that another time. But the funny thing is I remember the night that I had, like, since I converted, and the person said to me, okay, it's Ramadan and you need to fast starting tomorrow. And I was working in my corporate job, and I had never probably missed a meal in my life. So I was thinking to myself, okay, what could I eat that will last me through the day? Like, the idea of fasting is just like so strange. So I remember sitting like at 4 o'clock in the morning at my table with like a grilled cheese sandwich and mustard. So that was my first meal as like a convert. And then I remember like, you know, we had a meeting at, you know, I was working at J&J. We had this big meeting and the whole company was gathered for lunchtime. And I was so hungry, like I swear my stomach was like screaming. It was so hungry. Like, it was just really one of these things that I will like never forget. And you know, it's like, you know, it was a long time that I was a convert before I met the professor. And so, you know, as I said, I came to Islam through books and, you know, reading and not really interacting with Muslims at all, never having stepped foot in a mosque. So it was definitely a surprise when I did go to the mosque for the first time and, you know, was hearing a lot of Wahhabi kinds of things. And I remember, like, you know, asking people, I mean, I would get in regular conversations about, you know, I mean, of course, if you're a convert, the two things that really hit you are, one, you have to wear hijab. Like, immediately, you know, everyone comes out of the woodwork and starts telling you have to wear hijab. And then secondly, just that, you know, you're not really supposed to question things. I mean, I learned that very early on. Like, I would ask a lot of questions about things. Like, for example, you know, well, what if you know, I thought hijab was meant for protection. So what happens if wearing the hijab actually makes you more of a target? And people really did not like those kinds of questions. And I had a whole, like, laundry list of those types of questions. So I think it was like, and, you know, it was hard for someone who is, you know, thinking and coming at the religion in a very different way, because you don't have anything to base your, you know, your reasons for doing things on, except for what people tell you. I mean, and your brain, you know. So it was a little bit of a disconnect when people were not really interested in answering those types of questions or felt uncomfortable. So that was, you know, very interesting. And you know, I remember, of course, even, you know, like the process of, you know, I'm going to go back a little bit, you know, like thinking about becoming a Muslim was very interesting. I remember, like I've shared that I started looking into faith and into, you know, my like what's the purpose of life, you know, really seriously once I got to business school. And it was very interesting because it was like at the time when you are immersed in a culture, you know, business school culture, where it's really about money and success and getting ahead and, you know, competing with people to get the best interviews and the best jobs, and, you know, and then you really get hit with, you know, is this really all there is? And so I think that question of, you know, what is the purpose of life and what is the meaning of life really came to the fore. And then plus I was away from my family, you know, in a, like clear across the country. So I was free to do what I wanted to do and not worry about, you know, how I would impact my family or my parents or things like that. So all of those things were really important. And I remember, you know, so I guess another aspect of the story is, you know, of course, when you're, most people drink before they convert. And I was, you know, I would drink and I would go to these business school types of, you know, like gatherings where you're networking and meeting people and socializing and all of that. And, you know, I went to college at Berkeley, so clearly people drink a lot there, everywhere, of course. And I remember, so when I got to Cornell Business School and I met a couple of classmates, one of the classmates of mine prayed 5 times a day, and that was really like, you know, eye-opening for me, because it was like, why in the world would anyone pray 5 times a day? That was just really shocking. Like, what would make someone have that type of a conviction? And it really left an impact with me. And I, at that point, felt like, well, maybe that's what's been missing in my life, you know, because I felt like at that point very lost and very unanchored in our terminology now, and just felt, you know, depressed and anxious. Every day was kind of like, you know, you just sort of wish that I hope today's a good day, and maybe it would be and maybe it wouldn't be, but you were just kind of carried by the wind of chance, you know. And so you make a lot of decisions based on sort of this American mindset of materialism and, you know, success and just whatever, you know, selfish things that you want that will make you happy or that you think will get you ahead. And clearly that led to a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of bad decisions. And so all of a sudden I was looking at my classmates going, you know, why do these people all look like they have it together? And I feel so like such the imposter, right? I was hit with such a severe case of imposter syndrome. And then so when I met, you know, my classmate who prayed 5 times a day, I was like, okay, maybe religion is what's missing here, you know? And that was kind of what was interesting that sparked my interest in Islam and led to me finding a book and checking it out, Muhammad Maulana Ali's book on the religion of Islam, so in case anyone's interested. And so I remember my Muslim classmate challenging me the first Thanksgiving, going back home and saying, you know, are you going to drink alcohol when you go back for your Thanksgiving dinner? And, you know, and I said, yeah, I think so. I think my parents will probably serve wine. And so he said, well, what if you don't? You know, and it sort of stuck with me and it planted a seed. And so I went home and I didn't drink, and I never drank again after that. And I wasn't even Muslim. So that was like for 2.5 years before I even converted, I had stopped. And so it's sort of interesting. It's like the things that you think that are important to you and the things that you think you can't let go of. When you actually start experimenting and wondering, you know, questioning, like, how important really is this to me? How much of my world is tied to the things that I've always assumed? You know, like we've talked here in the surahs about, you know, your world, everything that you tie your world to, and how the Quran comes in and says, you know what, all of those things are really not important. That is exactly the process that you go through as a convert, and it's a very surprising process that I think is also, you know, like when you start taking this path and you make your intention to God, I think God starts with you on that journey and starts helping you decide what can kind of be peeled away and what can be tested and what can be let go of. And I know that after 2.5 years of this process of trying different things, I even remember the first night I was like, okay, I want to just feel what it's like to put my head on the floor in sujood. And it was the strangest feeling. Like it was just weird. It's like, you know, I can't even describe it. It's like if you thought you could fly and you jumped out a window. It was like that weird. But, you know, it was just very curious. And so, you know, 2.5 years of this sort of discovery of like, what can you keep? What can you let go of? What's really important to you? You know, I mean, I think I knew probably at least, you know, 6 months to a year into my journey of reading that Islam was the truth. Like it felt right to me. But I just, as I have said before, I wasn't ready to make that commitment. And by the time I reached the night that I converted, I had no intention of converting. It was like I had signed up for an Islamic adult school class. I talked about that once before. I'll share that story too some other time. But someone came to meet me to answer questions for me, and then pushed me to convert. And you know, when I think about that, it's like I was just floating for a very long time. I had no interest in converting. I had no reason to convert. I was perfectly fine. And it was like God came and just sort of like kicked me and said, okay, this is it. Tonight's the night. Boom. And tomorrow you start fasting. And, you know, and I was so happy. And because God knew that I was ready. And so God facilitated that moment. And there have been just so many moments like that along the way that they're countless, you know. And I think even when you look back on them and you recognize, you know, times that you maybe didn't think God was there and God actually was in hindsight, it's a really incredible feeling. And so it's, you know, then I think more than anything, you feel like you're not alone. And I think people in this society really are struck with the loneliness of this life. And if there's one thing that I think Islam has, you know, or my relationship with God has really comforted me in, is that I'm not alone. And you know, the other night, we were chatting with a few of us here, and the professor was explaining that I've become more and more fanatic since my conversion. And someone also said that, you know, they could hear the passion in me of, after 27 years of being a convert, still can hear that spark of, like, you know, early convert days. And I felt like that was the nicest thing that they could have said, because you know, I feel so grateful that I was allowed to become Muslim, and this journey of knowledge and experience has made me more fanatic, because it has made me more sure, and made me feel very secure in my, you know, natural tendency to want to question and even argue and stand up, and, you know, and like even fight with people if I have to, because I feel like I'm standing up for something that is right or just. You know, I rub certain people the wrong way because I get very passionate. But, you know, in thinking about it, I'm unapologetic about it, because, I mean, I try to be nice, I try not to be mean, and if I go too far, I try to apologize. but because I feel like this journey is one that I take for God, and everything that I do is for God, to pay back that gratitude. Because I understand, like, the whole, when we talk about going from darkness to light, I lived in darkness for 25 years, and that is a horrible place to be. And once you've been in that darkness and you've been in the light, you never want to go back. And so, you know, if you can spend every day paying back for the gratitude, you know, through service, through, you know, anything that you can do for God, you still feel like you can't pay it back enough, because you know what the alternative is. So for that, I just, you know, always, I'm such an advocate for conversion, and even like, okay, so I'll finish with the last story, which is really sweet. So Mito, I've said many times, goes to Catholic school. And the other day, and every so often he'll come and he'll ask me really random, like, teenage questions. So he'll say, so Mom, you know, when you were a teenager, or he'll say, did you ever hear of this alcohol name? Because I know before you're Muslim, you used to drink, right? And then he would tell me the name. I don't even remember what it was. This was just the other day. And I'm like, no, I've never heard of that. And then he was saying to me, you know, I was doing a little bit of research. He's like, you know, I go to school and, you know, all my classmates are Christian, but none of them really are into it. They don't really believe, you know. And so I started doing a little research on my own. Did you know that more Christians are leaving the faith than ever? And it's not because their parents did a bad job. It's because they did such a good job of teaching them about Jesus, and it doesn't make sense to them. So they're leaving and they're questioning. And I thought, whoa, that is really amazing. And I was very proud of him for being, like, smart and inquisitive, you know, and I try to keep sort of that open, you know, like, line of communication where I hope he can ask me all kinds of weird things like that. But, you know, that to me, you know, like, and if you get my weekly email, I made a point about saying, you know, children of converts, you know, it's like you think a lot about trying to create an environment where children can grow up, like, feeling free to ask questions and loving their religion and believing, you know, it was an opportunity for me to say, well, you know, the reason why is because, you know, what we teach here is about building your relationship with God and, you know, thinking of God as your friends. And that's just, there's no place for that, you know, with between the confusion of, you know, Trinity and all the other things that, you know, his classmates, it doesn't resonate with them. So anyway, you know, these are just some of the musings of, like, you know, thinking back of the conversion journey, and they're really special. And again, I'm just very grateful for this whole experience, and I hope to share more funny, interesting stories over time.